Hey, what's going on everybody? My name is StevieWunderKid and welcome back to another GTA 5 drifting video. So in light of this week being the Benefactor themed event week, I figured I'd do another manufacturer drift car tier list where this time I go through all of the Benefactor cars that are worthy of being drifters and I'm going to be ranking them in a tier list format. So keep in mind guys that this event week is going to be ending on June 6th, 2024. So if you want to pick up any of these cars, the highest chance of you being able to get them is this week. But if you happen to watch this video after the fact, some of these cars are still going to be available normally, and there are a lot of unique ones that I really haven't showcased in a video here, so I'm really excited to cover them and share them with you guys. So this is going to operate the same way that I did my Devours video. We're just going to be going tier by tier and explaining some pros and cons of each drift car while showcasing some drifting in the background and some info about the car on screen. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alrighty, so kicking off with B tier, here we have all the normal non-V12 shafter variants. So the original shafter, the shafter LWB or long wheelbase, and then the shafter LWB armored. I do know that there are slight differences between each of these lower variants, but for the most part their performance and handling are the same. Some pros about these base model shafters is that they are relatively cheap. In addition to that, these cars have decent handling, they hold a good amount of angle, and they're fairly agile while staying relatively smooth because they're pretty heavy cars. Moving into some cons, these cars are very slow due to both the high weight and the lack of power. You have to be really aggressive with the mid-drive speed boost to be able to keep these cars sideways and actually keep them in a drift. More specifically, the OG shafter, not the LWB or the LWB armored variant. This version has a lot more body roll and requires even more effort to keep in drift, so it can be a bit of a handful to try to get this thing sideways in the first place. And of course the last con, which is pretty common among a lot of the cars I'm going to be covering in this video, that this is a removed website vehicle. However, I think that the lower tier shafter variants that again aren't the V12 version, I really don't think they're worth buying because you can get the shafter V12, which is actually cheaper than some of these variants, and overall it's just a way better drift car. So B tier is handled with those shafters. Moving into A tier, we're going to kick this off with the Benefactor Feltzer. Some pros about this car is that this car is super cheap and it's very underrated. When it comes to handling, this car has the right amount of weight, grip, and power to be fast in drift, and it has a very strong mid-drive speed boost, so long and fast drifts are absolutely a breeze in this car. Moving into some cons, the Feltzer was unfortunately a removed website vehicle, which really doesn't make that much sense. It was an OG vehicle and people love this car honestly, so that's just kind of annoying. When it comes to handling, this car is slightly twitchy and it also really doesn't hold that much steering lock. It can be hard to drift smooth, especially with how much power this car has. It can be very touchy and hard to control, so that's definitely something to keep in mind, but overall definitely a blast of a car and definitely worth you checking out. Next up in A tier, we've got the Glendale and the Glendale Custom. Some pros about this car is that it's extremely smooth and fluid. It is a heavier car, but it actually has really good torque and holds lots of angle. It's got a pretty easy mid-drive speed boost as well. Some cons about this car is, and again unfortunately it was a removed website vehicle, when it comes to actually drifting this car, it does have good torque and it's very easy to drift, but it is still pretty slow, which might not make it the most exciting drift car if you're into drifting really fast. It's definitely not the car for that. It's definitely more of a beginner and smooth, just kind of a mess around car, so that's something definitely to keep in mind. Continuing on with A tier, we have probably the most oddball drift car on this list, the LM87, and I actually hadn't drifted this car ever before, but somebody in my Discord had suggested it and I went and checked it out and I was totally blown away. It's completely unexpected, but as a drift car, the LM87 feels super solid. It's got great power with a very strong mid-drive speed boost, and it actually holds more angle and feels a lot smoother in drift than you'd expect for a rear-engine race car like this. Moving into some cons, obviously this is a race car, so it's pretty grippy, so you do need to be pretty consistent with the mid-drive speed boost and with aggressive steering inputs to keep the car in a drift. In addition to that, this car is fairly snappy and easy to over-rotate if you're not careful, so smooth drifting with this thing is definitely a bit more difficult. In addition, the last con is that it is a fairly expensive car, but honestly, separate from this car being able to drift, the possibilities for customizing and racing this car, I think it's decently worth the money, but again, fairly expensive, not worth you buying it just to be a drift car. Next up, we've got the Benefactor Schlagen GT. Some pros about this car is that it's extremely fast and powerful, and it's got a very strong mid-drive speed boost. It also is a bit of a heavier car, which gives you a momentum advantage. It allows you to kind of float the car around corners, but it's also still agile enough to toss around. It feels pretty easy to drive in that regard. Some cons though is that this car is very twitchy and it really doesn't hold that much steering lock at all, and because of the amount of power the car has and the lack of steering angle, it can be very touchy and hard to control because it does lack the front grip to be able to properly throw lots of angle without immediately oversteering. So again, another car that's got a lot of power. It's really fun and really rowdy, but it will take quite a bit of skill to master. Same thing with the SM722. This is another A tier car. Some pros about this car is that it's extremely fast and powerful, and it's got a very strong and very easy to repeat mid-drive speed boost, and it's fairly easy to float the car around using its momentum because it's on the heavier side. Again, pretty similar story lower to the Slogan GT. When it comes to some cons, the SM722 is very touchy and easy to over-rotate. It's got a lack of steering angle. When you combine that with its high power, it's relatively hard to control without a lot of practice. Next up, we've got the Sterling GT. This is a super versatile and popular car. It's got really good customization, and it's also got the option for the HSW upgrade, which helps not only with drifting, but also for other things like racing. When it comes to drifting, the Sterling GT's got a lot of power, which makes long and fast drifts very easy to link together. And even if you don't have the HSW upgrade applied, this car is still pretty quick. Also, it's decently heavy, so you can use the car's momentum to your advantage to kind of float the car around corners, and in that regard, it does feel a little bit more fluid when it's actually drifting. Some cons with this car is that despite its popularity, it was a removed website vehicle, which definitely does suck. And when it comes to this car's handling, especially with the HSW upgrade, the Sterling GT is very touchy. It doesn't hold that much angle, and it does require a lot of corrections to keep smooth drifts going, so definitely not for the faint of heart, definitely for more skilled drifters in my opinion. And also, the mid-drive speed boost with the Sterling GT can be a bit inconsistent and hard to hit, which can definitely cause the car to bog down and fall out of power when you don't want it to. And next up, we've got the Benefactor Serrano. This is a super cheap and underrated drift car. It's got a lot of power, it's got a strong mid-drive speed boost that can easily connect together long and fast drifts, and also, surprisingly enough, it holds a good amount of angle and is fairly easy and agile, so it's good to toss around. Some cons with this car is that, again, unfortunately, it was a removed website vehicle, and when it comes to more specific about the handling, this car is very twitchy and will require a lot of corrections given the amount of power the car has, so on first glance, it can be pretty hard to control, but you do have a bit of a safety cushion with the amount of angle that the car holds, so definitely a little bit easier than you would expect to drift, but again, the drifting won't be all that smooth, so kind of pick your poison there. I still think it's a really fun car. Moving into the S tier, first off, we've got the GOAT, the OG drift car, the Benefactor Schwarzer. Some pros about this car. You guys have probably heard me talk about this car time and time again, but it's super cheap and it's really good for beginners because not only do you not have to invest that much money, but it's very easy to get sideways. Unfortunately, this car was removed from one of the websites, but you can still actually steal this car off the street and insure it, which is really nice. It's also got some decent customization, and it had some extra mods added to the car back in 2022. When it comes to actually drifting, the Schwarzer's got lots of power and great steering angle. It's super easy to throw around and has a very strong mid-drive speed boost, so you can kind of throw it at any low, medium, or really high speed drifts and it will handle it just fine. When it comes to some cons, the Schwarzer will require a bit more work to actually set it up for drifting. In my opinion, this car feels much better stance rather than just equipping low grip tires, so every time you take this car out, if you prefer to just run it stance, you're going to need to take the extra time and ammo to do that and stance the car every time you want to drift it. Kind of an annoying thing. It does take some extra time. It's definitely not as convenient as low grips, but I think it's personally worth it. And also, when it comes to some handling stuff, this car does feel slightly twitchy. Honestly, it's not too bad, but it will require some corrections for tighter and more technical drifts, but it really doesn't take away too much from the car's handling, and you can definitely drive around it. And closing out the S tier here, we've got the Benefactor Shafter V12, and by extension, the Shafter V12 Armored variant. Some pros about this car is that it's super cheap, and it's actually quite practical because it's got 4 doors, so you can kind of turn it into a drift taxi if you really wanted to. In addition, this car is incredibly powerful. I mean, it's so easy to initiate and maintain long drifts with this thing. It's on the heavier side, so it's got a bit more momentum, so you can kind of float the car around corners. It really helps to keep those drifts smooth. It also holds a lot of angle, and it's really versatile for all skill levels because, again, it's got the power, it's got the angle, it's got the weight to be thrown at just about any type of corner you'd like, and it'd be fine. Some cons about this car is that it can be slightly twitchy and grippy, but like we saw with the Schwarzer, this really isn't enough to drastically affect its handling, and it's definitely something you can drive around with only a minimal amount of practice. And really, there's not much else wrong with this car. It's easily one of my favorite low grip drift cars in the game, and if you don't already have one, definitely go and buy it. If you're gonna buy one of these cars, I think the Shafter V12 is the first one you should pick up because it's an absolute blast to drive. So that is going to conclude my tier list ranking all of the Benefactor drift cars, which you can all pick up this week. Up until June 6th, again, all of these cars are available, and some of them are also on sale, so definitely hop on these deals while you can. But I'm going to leave it there. I hope this video was helpful for you guys, kind of condensing all of the Benefactor vehicles, some of which I've already covered, some of which I've never covered before, into one video. So I hope you guys enjoyed it once again and found it helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video.